Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's coffee talk, our first of the year. My name is Sean O'Brien, president of QuickRate, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming in on this. I guess it's still snowy, at least where I am in the southeast. We're excited to bring you a bunch of new content for 2025, let you know what we're going to be up to, and go over what we've seen last year and what we expect to see this year. I'm the director of analytics here at QuickRate and QwickAnalytics, and I've spent my entire career working with community banks in all facets of financial analysis, and spent over half of my career here now with Sean at QuickRate.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Yeah. I think that's really kind of the tone of today is, really kind of what we're seeing and hearing, over the past couple of months and just kind of expectations for this year. Just a reminder, we will send out a copy of the slides and a link to the recording, either later today or more likely Monday morning. Certainly throughout the presentation, as you know, just drop a question in the chat box or the Q&A box. We'll monitor those and either answer or take those at an appropriate break in the conversation or certainly at the end of the discussion. We do have a lot of slides today. I don't know if we'll get through them all, but we wanted to have them in there just in case. So you'll of course get a copy of them, but we did kind of load up the slides today because again, I think first of the year with a lot of things to kind of rehash, readdress, remind of. Certainly, some of the discussions just around what we're seeing and hearing from regulators and auditors. So we just wanted to compile as much of it as we could and then discuss as much as we can as we move through the discussion. We'll start off as we always do with just a few polling questions. Certainly appreciate everybody's participation in these if you can. We've got 5 questions today. They're all pretty straightforward, familiar to you, kind of, start of the year questions. But the first one, is do you expect your reserve to be higher, lower, or about the same at the end of 2025? So we'll just give this 30 or 40 seconds. Okay, we'll go ahead and end this one. Share those. 56% of you anticipate a higher reserve, 39% about the same, and rounding gets us to 6% lower. So thank you very much for answering that one. Let's go back to the next question. Past dues. Are your past due loans higher today than they were a year ago? So just again, a simple yes or no. Again, thank you all for participating. Share those. 58% of you are seeing higher, 42% no. And that's kind of consistent with, for those of you who are on the trends webinar, we've certainly seen, year over year past dues, while not at an alarming rate, certainly higher than they were this time a year ago. All right. Kind of a follow-up question. Whoops, let me make sure that shit launched here. Stop sharing. Is about past due loans. Are you anticipating your past due loans increasing this year? So again, just a simple yes or no on this one. E. 58% of you say no, 42% said yes. So again, thank you very much. Just 2 more now. The next one regarding regulatory exams. Has your ACL CECL process been through a regulatory exam? So, I think that's part of our discussion today is just the change we're seeing for some of you who may be going on your second review of the process. And that one, 85% have, 15% have not. So thank you again. And our final question is regarding unfunded commitments. do you have a balance in the reserve for unfunded commitments? Just again, a simple no, yes or no. You know, certainly a topic we've addressed on these coffee talks. It's certainly trending a particular direction from when we first started. So again, we'll touch on that as well. So this is actually good to see. 84% of you do, 16% don't. So I think that's kind of consistent with what the trend certainly that we're seeing and hearing from our bank. So again, thank you for participating in those. We'll share the results in the email that we send out with the link to the recording and a copy of the slides. All right, so let's just kind of talk kind of what we're hearing about, kind of here and now, and certainly in our discussions with banks over the past few months. Certainly, I think one of the things that was kind of front and center for us is just our regulators and auditors are asking more questions about your process. I think if we go back to the first, kind of time regulators and auditors saw our CECL process, they were really more focused on just making sure something was in place. I think this time around, we're certainly seeing and hearing from our banks that, they're asking more questions about your process, right? Just want to understand what you're doing and make sure you're understanding, kind of how things work. I think the kind of the message in all of that is, if you don't document what you're doing, then in their mind, it doesn't exist. I think this is particularly true with the Q factors. Whether you have some type of narrative or explanation, or if you're using the matrix that we have, I think some kind of discussion, even if it's concise, is important. And if you change a Q factor, it's imperative that you have some type of comment or narrative around that, because if you change it without that, you can almost guarantee a question about why you changed it or what changed that you decided to make the change to the Q factor. So I think,
and that's exactly what we've seen. Something that we're going to be all dealing with a little bit more. Well, not all, but those of us that are seeing some creep in our non-performers and any increases in bad assets or increases in charge-offs are going to require, as we've talked about a few times in the past, a different balance between the historical loss rates and the Q factors. As we start seeing some of those anticipated losses that haven't shown up on the balance sheet yet, that are Q factors in the past, become realized historical losses, that burden shifts from the Q factors, right, to the historical loss rate, which suggests almost necessarily that there's going to be a reevaluation of the qualitative factor adjustment, because the Q factor adjustment is an adjustment to the historical rate. So as our historical rates go up, if those losses went from anticipated to realized, we're not necessarily going to continue anticipating the same level of additional losses going forward than we did before we realized the losses. So we're going to see decreases in Q factor adjustments from quarter to quarter as historical loss rates go up. That is totally acceptable, but is something that is always sort of a flag from an examiner. When they see a Q factor adjustment go down, there needs to be an accompanying explanation, right? Write in your notes there, make notes. Points per paper is a big thing when it comes to CECL reserves, and they're not necessarily criticizing the fact that your Q factor is going down, but if you don't have a detailed description of why it went down, perfectly acceptable description, then that's going to flag it and they're going to ask for more detail. And then you start going down a wormhole you might not want to go down.
Yeah, and I think Steve raises a good point. And I think really is, I probably should have put it as a bullet point, because that's really one of the takeaways is in their request for more information, they're not necessarily concerned or questioning what you're doing. They just simply want to see it documented, right? They're not, like in most of our discussions, they're not challenging what you're doing or saying or proposing. They just simply want to see it documented. And so to Steve's point about points for paper, that's really the, kind of the overriding message is you just have to get something down so they can follow the discussion and kind of the process. And again, if it's not there, that's really what they're bothered by, not necessarily the decision you made to change it, but the fact that you did change it and don't put anything down, they're going to question it. And again, that's really the takeaway. And it's kind of the same thing dovetails into the unfunded commitments. If you don't have anything in this reserve, despite it probably being, still reasonable, they're going to ask you a question about it. Again, you may end the discussion still with nothing in the reserve, but they're going to ask you about it. And so we just see more conversations around this, and banks just putting something in the reserve. And so we had a question, kind of a follow, explain points for paper. It's really just a kind of a term we use for documenting what you're doing, right? Again, there's just an old adage that if it's not on paper, if it's not documented, it doesn't exist in the eyes of a regulator or auditor. As an example, right? You may have a 20-minute conversation at your board meeting or your ALCO committee or whatever, but if there's no mention of it in a minutes, then the regulator or examiner can't see that, or auditor can't see that, so they assume nothing happened. And so it's just one of those things that it's just, you want to make sure you're getting credit for what you're doing, for the discussions you're having, the thoughts and the conversations you're having, but it has to be on paper for it to have any value to a regulator or an auditor. So we've just, Steve's kind of always coined the term points for paper as we've kind of discussed that.
Well, it's something that I'm dealing with my high school son, especially in the digital world. People aren't making as many actual notes as they used to, and he's doing a type of math where you need to make notes, and so the teacher's always saying points for paper. So yeah, it's just like Sean said, documenting it. It doesn't need to be an overly long, drawn out explanation, but if your Q factor adjustment decreases because you just realized a loss, make a note saying, this credit was expected to have a loss and now has had a loss, so we don't expect it to have more of a loss. That's it. So therefore, negative, or not negative, but a lower Q factor adjustment for that segment than the previous quarter.
Yeah, and again, I think I've said this in previous coffee talks. When an examiner comes in, right, particularly if they're a new examiner, which a lot of our banks, a lot of you experience just like we do at our bank, the first thing they do is they go grab the board minutes, right? And they're going to read the board minutes because they want to see what's being shared with the board, and then they're potentially going to look at committee minutes, et cetera. And so again, if it's not there, then they just assume nothing's being discussed or done. So that's really the mindset, is that's where they're going for information, right? They're looking at your call report, and then they're going to the board minutes to see what's being shared and discussed on a monthly basis. And so this was these next couple of slides are slides. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. I just want you to have them. But we shared this in the fall last year, and we kind of just said, hey, this is a good reminder of things for you to think about as you're discussing this, the ACL or your CECL policy with your board. And we thought it'd be worthwhile to put it back in here because you still want to kind of just annually refresh your policies and think about them. But I added the fact you're the regulator and the auditor to it, right? Because we're really, again, speaking to multiple constituencies with our policies, right? We're speaking to our board and to our bank, but we're also speaking to third parties who, again, are going to come in and look at these things. And so, again, just having a healthy review of this or parts of it throughout the year, thinking about how we can improve it or improve our process. These are really kind of the key areas that you want to be thinking about and deciding, are there ways to optimize, any of this? And it's not designed to be a complete or comprehensive, set of bullet points, but they're just the most common things that, again, we think any good process or policy or the way you kind of approach it are going to have. And then you just want to make sure, again, you're documenting it for for really all the constituencies who you might encounter. Steve, anything you want to add here before we go on?
No, I would just point out that when on the last bullet point for qualitative factors, when we mentioned consider using a matrix, that's just what we mean by that is just some sort of objective, well, / subjective framework that just allows you to detail why you've made certain adjustments, where the math is coming from, even if the math is subjective, right? Saying slightly more risk equals 10 basis points and significantly more risk equals 30 basis points. As long as you have documented some sort of framework that you go and reanalyze on an ongoing basis, and you can make adjustments to the additional level of risk that you see in the marketplace and what that would mean in your framework for adjustments to your Q factor going forward. Again, it's the points for paper concept, but it's also, it provides the math paper trail. So your examiner can say, all right, this is how you got from 20 basis point, Q factor adjustment to 35 basis point Q factor adjustment. You could sit here and argue all day, should it have been 20 or 35? But if you have a framework that shows over time, you're consistently applying the same subjective decisions to changing economic conditions and local conditions, that provides the defense and justification that you need to go from A to B. Because really all this is about is changes over time, right? We've already established what absolute levels of reserves need to be, plus or minus. They've been pretty similar even before CECL. We've been at 125 as an industry, Sean, for a good while now, before and after CECL, and before and after credit cycle. To an extent as well, but those documenting those changes over time in an objective mathematical framework it really goes a long way and puts a lot of those questions to bed, or at least allows them to check the box and move on with their exam. And we provide what we call a Q factor decision support matrix, I believe is the term that we use in our knowledge base. It's just an Excel template that you can take and download and make your own. It's not something we service and support. It's just a framework that you can build on and tweak. If you're still looking for something, or your examiners are expecting a more thorough evaluation of your change in Q factors, it might be something you consider looking at. I know we've shown that in the past, and it's in the knowledge base. I'll show it in a little bit. At least I'll point to it when I'm pulling up my screen.
Great, thank you, Steve. Nate, thank you for the comments in the chat. Just talking about it, adjusting the general ledger for unfunded advances to the loan pool and vice versa. And then secondly, that, examiners aren't following the guidance, on, kind of the probability of funding. I think your point about the advance rate, or just, kind of the utilization rate, that does seem to be coming, as you put it, an unpublished, kind of way of their thinking about it. So we're going to continue to monitor it, see if there are changes that we can make to our tool to kind of, incorporate that. But yeah, I think that's certainly the trend with the unfunded is clearly an area where, again, there was no prescription, but we do start to see some more common approaches from the examiners regarding these. And, we'll try to be sensitive to those to see if there's a way to improve our process on it.
Until we see some sort of actual guidance come out that around real numbers, as opposed to that, there's not a whole lot that we can provide extra. Although one thing that we can start monitoring a little bit closer, since we have the our CECLSolver user trends, where we aggregate all the thousands of scenarios and present changes in amongst our few hundred community banks who are using our tool, changes in WARMs, changes in Q factors and reserves at the segment level amongst all of our users. We can take a closer look at the probability of funding and kind of ignore all our default values and see how many institutions, what percentage of our users are overriding with higher probability of fundings and what percentage are overriding with lower probability of fundings, and maybe try to give you guys some anecdotal trends on what we're seeing amongst our users for the probability of funding on the unfunded commitments. It's already a relatively, I don't want to say esoteric these days, because they're forcing everyone to start learning about this stuff, but we still have half the community banks in the country not having any reserve for the unfunded commitments, and those that do are doing very small percentages on the whole, and we'll share those statistics again in a minute. So it seems like a pretty fine point for them to be really sticking on, but they're the examiners and they can choose any point that they want to stick on.
That's right. Thanks, Louise and Nate, for the comments, and Sylvan, thank you for your discussion and comment in the chat as well. So I certainly encourage everybody to take a look at those. as well. So we'll keep monitoring those. But thank you for those kind words. All right, so this was just a list of some of the updates and enhancements. Again, we just try to put this in here, to continually kind of keep everybody up to speed with what we're working on. Steve, I don't know if there's anything you want to touch on before we move on these.
We have a couple. I have a couple screenshots, and we might share a screen here in a minute. But just looking at the summary page here, the only thing that we haven't mentioned, so all the Fed stress testing economic trends and scenarios, that's something we've shown before. It's been updated for 2025. So all those handful of economic indicators that the Fed uses in their supervisory stress tests for the big DFAST institutions, there's about 10 or so economic trends that they show, long-term historical quarterly trends, and then they kind of summarize from their economists, from the Fed's own economists, what the next 3 years quarterly might look like for those economic trends. So those are great additional justifications for your qualitative factor adjustments, and that's on the knowledge base. And in February of every year, they update that for the next year. So that was updated just about a week ago, and it's up there on the knowledge base. The additional peer historical loss analysis and flexibility, I'll show you a screenshot. We had talked about that, I believe, back in December. Brand new that nobody has seen, which I'll be sharing in just a second here, are the scenario organization and management tool. Actually, why don't we go ahead and let's just start going through them here.
Okay.
Yeah, go to the next one there. All right, video resource library. You guys all know about that now. On the top of each tab of the CECLSolver, we have links that are appropriate to that particular content on that tab. And if you click on the header of the tab, you get all the links. We continue to add to this some of our more lively discussions about things like unfunded commitments, and we just added one for the Q factor support matrix, that Excel file. I think it was just last week or 2 weeks ago, we added a video where you can watch us discuss that in detail. Yeah, but that's available, and hopefully it's your first go-to if you have a question about how we're handling something in the tool. Get that discussion, and then if you still need help, we're always available. We've talked about this a couple times. Just kind of reorganized, reordered the tabs a little bit on the CECLSolver, just to make them kind of flow a little bit better, sort of left to right. Right? You have an overview tab, and then you have the meat of your ACL analysis for the loan portfolio in the salmon. Is that salmon colored, John?
Yeah.
And then unfunded commitments and securities, a little bit lower priority, but still important, there in green. And then all the peer data trends and user CECLSolver user blind pool trends and stuff on the right hand side. This is the new, except I think we'll just do it here. Doing it live doesn't really add any. So we have had, and this is directly from a lot of our users. Some of our best users have created a lot of scenarios. Some of you have been with us for a few years now, and you're running multiple scenarios each quarter. Some of you are doing it monthly. And so at this point, you may have a drop down box with a ton of scenarios that seem to be completely randomly ordered, maybe by whatever order you named them when you gave it each scenario a subjective name. We thought it was time to create, to organize those scenarios and allow you to manage them a lot better. So now, instead of the drop-down box that just allows you to click on a scenario, you'll have a button that'll open up a pop-up window, and it'll organize. It's organizing all your scenarios by year, by when you created it or last edited or modified it. And you can expand a year. So let's say for all the scenarios that we did this year, in 2025, you click on the little plus next to 2025, and you see all the scenarios that you created this year with the name that you gave it, the date it was created, what user, who at your bank created the scenario, and when it was last updated. So you can see if you updated it, separately since you created it. All that information is right there. You can click on one of the scenarios and you can open it or delete it. Yeah. So that was, we were starting getting to a natural evolution of the tool where we have users making lots of scenarios. So we thought this would be really helpful.
Yes, thank you, Steve. And just we had a question in the chat. Thanks again, Nate. I think you a lot of users were asking for this. But Steve, the question is, are you able to address the file upload option? We were just getting started.
Sure.
Yeah.
We wanted to just create a repository for any external Microsoft files, right? Excel files, Word files, PDF files, and PowerPoint files that are something that you wanted to attach to the CECL to a particular scenario or just to your account in general. So for example, if you use our Q Factor decision support matrix, that Excel template, right, and you edit it and modify it each quarter, you can save that file and then you click on the file upload button and you can save that file up to our servers securely and sort of attach it to that scenario. So next time you come and pull up the scenario 6 months from now, you can see any ancillary files. If you have additional spreadsheets where you discuss, individually assessed loans, or any additional analysis that's not part of the tool that you want to be warehoused or organized with either a specific scenario or just in your general bucket that you can use for any scenarios, that's what it's there for. Of course, we have 64-bit encryption and security, so any of those files are completely secure. We're very used to handling all those types of non-public information files, but it's just an organizational tool for you guys.
Yep, great. So yeah, Troy, it is meant to be kind of a support option there. All right. Next up, Steve, you want to just another coming soon attraction here? I don't know if you
we're still working on working out the kinks in this, but the idea was, I don't know, for those of you who have used our credit stressing tool, I just made up a new word, credit stress testing tool. And for those of you who haven't, it's a good time to look at it. We're happy to walk you through the tool. It's an automated credit stress test at the portfolio level, which allows you to look at your historical losses in different economic environments and project them out to the future. So you can answer what if questions like, if our loan portfolio over the next couple of years, if it were to perform credit quality wise, like it did during a recent healthy period or during the last credit crisis, what would be the pro forma impact on our P&L and capital? It's a great tool we've had out there for a good while, but we really liked how you could, and a lot of our users really liked how you could not just look at median loss rates for your peer group over time, but really kind of stress your peers' historical loss rates over time to look at things like 75th or 90th percentile loss rates for your peer group over time, over long historical periods going back in time. And so we thought we would sort of bring that functionality into our CECLSolver. So it's not changing the way, it's adding an additional option for looking at your peer trends to compare them for qualitative factor adjustments or sanity checks or whatever it is. The way that we currently calculate peer historical losses are using a weighted average methodology. That'll still be there, but now there'll be a separate button where you can go here and pull up any percentile you want, 25th, 50th percentile. You can really stress, look at 75th or 90th percentile loss rates for the whole portfolio, or even for just one segment. If you want to kind of compare your loss rate to average losses for consumer and C&I, but to 80th percentile losses for some of your CRE, because maybe you have a higher concentration or your examiners want a little bit more conservatism for those reserve ratios, then it allows you to the flexibility of doing that. So just another way to look at peer data in a way that we think could be helpful.
Yeah, I think as Steve indicated, right? I mean, I think the concept here was, as he mentioned, right? People love the stress test, portfolio stress test that we have available to you as a QwickAnalytics subscriber. But the concept, again, of trying to make, even like our Q factors a bit more objective, this just kind of uses, calls on historical information. And so, again, you can be, somewhat directional and objective with data. And so we felt like it was just a further enhancement that could, bring some clarity, bring some certainty, but do it without some subjectivity, right? It's really just calling on, peer numbers. And so we just thought it was a feature that could be helpful to a lot of our banks, who particularly the ones who like to use the peer comparison, as a Q factor adjustment. This just really allows you to very highly target or focus, a particular peer group and a percentile to come up with some loss numbers. So
to give real numbers to it, right? As opposed
exactly.
to let's say you feel like you need a higher qualitative factor adjustment for a segment, and you go and you look at the peer data, and instead of saying, well, the peer median is 40 basis points, and I want to make a Q factor adjustment based upon something higher than the median. So you randomly pick 75 basis points. Now you can choose a percentile and have an objective basis for that higher adjustment you make by increasing the above the median or weighted average for a peer group.
Exactly. And so certainly more to come on this, but we're getting closer. So we wanted to start to make you aware of it. Steve touched on the stress test, the Fed stress test, the information they use for the larger DFAST banks, but we updated the new scenarios as they've published them. Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything here before we move on.
No, I mean it's self-explanatory. It's there in the knowledge base. On the knowledge base page, there's a big green button for these trends. They are now updated, like I said, through 2024 is all historical. And there's two scenarios that they run. You can see right on the screenshot here what those economic trends that they use. The baseline scenario are actual projections, right? It's when the economists sat down and they sort of averaged out all the Fed's economists' actual middle of the road projections. That's the baseline scenario. The severely adverse scenario.
And Steve, let me pause you there for a second, because I think that was really kind of, again, one of the focus points of it is this is giving you, a lot of times in our Q factor notes, examiners or regulators will want to see, economic data, cited or utilized. The baseline scenario, as Steve just indicated, are the actual Fed economists, it's kind of a survey of those, what their expectations are. So again,
Yes.
It just felt like it was good, tangible, objective information that from the Fed that you could use and incorporate if you were looking for, to include any economic data in your Q factor discussion.
Right.
Sorry.
And then the severely adverse scenario is not an economic forecast or projection at all. It's a hypothetical, I wouldn't say Armageddon, but hypothetical, very adverse scenario. And so if you toggle between baseline and severely adverse, it's not like, well, they think it's going to be somewhere in between these two. No, they think it's going to be the baseline, and the severely adverse is just for stress testing purposes.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Steve. All right, so on we go. Just again, a reminder on the user scenario trends that we continue to update. Again, we show you the median values as well as the 25th and 75th percentile. Again, anything to add here, Steve? This is
No, I mean that's been up there for a while. The screenshot is a couple quarters old, but the data is now live through the end of the year, so we have Q4 up there as well. And interestingly, what we're seeing is, I mean, no drastic changes anywhere, but and as we're going to discuss here in a little bit, we have been seeing past due loans and credit quality, some cracks in the armor of credit quality, but we haven't really seen that translate yet to any significant increases in reserves. And the best looking at our user trends, actually, the best answer that I have for that is because thinking about how we have to reserve now, right? We're not reserving like totally independently on a quarter to quarter basis. We're reserving based upon losses over the remaining lives of the assets. So even though we're seeing increases in historical losses over the last few quarters, and we'll show some more data on that in just a minute, we saw some decrease. We've been seeing decreases in warms, and if you think about it, if you're seeing higher losses at any given point in time, but the remaining lives of the assets has been decreasing, it ends up kind of neutralizing your reserve levels, because you're only reserving for you're reserving for loans as they accrue, losses as they accrue over time, and the period of time that they're accruing for if that's decreasing, right? If the duration of your portfolios is decreasing, then you're not going to absorb as many losses over a shorter period of time. So I think even though we're seeing increases in losses, we're not really seeing any significant increases in reserves across the board yet.
No, we're not, and that's actually was part of the genesis for the polling questions this morning. Is I was looking at the year-end stats from the QCBI for our trends webinar yesterday. I noticed that year over year, despite the fact that past dues were up, and even charge-offs to a certain extent were higher than they were a year ago, reserves actually at the median and almost at every percentile had come down year over year. And so
Yep.
I was kind of curious what everybody's kind of outlook was, because if you just looked at the raw community bank universe, past dues and charge-offs were up, but reserves actually slightly ticked down. So it was good. I was heartened by the responses in the survey, because that seems to be more in tune with what we're seeing. But it was, like I said, when you looked at the entire universe of banks, it was a little bit of a contradictory story in the year-end numbers. Steve, there was a comment in the chat about adding notes column in the historical thing. So we'll have to see if we can fit anything else on that page. But
yeah,
kind of. We'll take a look at it. And
yeah, the way so far when people have asked about making notes in the historical analysis, since the loan portfolio summary tab has all the same segments, all the same rows, pretty much one row per each segment of the portfolio. For now, I'm just suggesting that people make notes in the on the loan portfolio summary tab that has again a note space for each segment of the portfolio. Because you're right, it's not in the historical analysis tab, but I can add it. We can add it.
Yeah. Good. All right. So then, as we know, and just kind of a summary, we continue to add information to make sure we are able to share as much information as we can. Steve, I don't think if you want to add anything here, just get into
just bragging about it. Now we got our 43rd state. We got our 43rd state added in as CECLSolver users, and just to give you an idea of the data set that we're using when we share those trends. So this is something that I put out a couple quarters ago, and it's something I like to track. I know some of this information is stuff that Sean would have gone on in the quarterly results webinar the other day, but we're just giving you an idea of over the last 2 years, right, since the beginning of CECL, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. Past due lows. So these are 30 to 89 days, median and 75th percentile. The reason I look at both is because when you start looking at things like past due loans and charge-offs at the segment level, and you're using like a median or a percentile rank, you get a lot of zeros at the median level during these types of environments. So looking at the 75th percentile also gives you an idea of directionally where the trend is headed. Even if more than half the banks have zero past due loans in construction, if we look at 75th percentile, we can see, increase, improvement, or deterioration in asset quality, even though the median is negligible. So we see here over the last 2 years, except for, every single segment of the portfolio has higher 30 to 89 days past due than at any quarter over the last 2 years, all in the fourth quarter. The only one that's not is a 75th percentile for C&I. Has come down a slight bit, but every other loan segment at the median and the 70th percentile has been increased significantly in the fourth quarter, after peaking early in the year or late last year, and then kind of being flat for most of peaking at the end of 2023 and being maybe flat to slightly up in 2024. They all kind of had a little bit of a jump in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and so again, like Steve indicated, right? It's impossible to forecast, but you can always try to be directionally accurate. And so I think this is, kind of helpful in that pursuit of just trying to be directionally accurate, as which the way the winds are blowing. Here's the non-accrual number, Steve.
Yeah, non-accrual. We don't do anything for the 90+ days because it's just not managed as a separate, distinct category like it used to be. But for non-accrual loans, we see similar trends. Consumer loans at the median level, 0, but at the 75th percentile, you can see a consistent increasing trend there. Same thing with 1 to 4 family residential, has been creeping up each quarter for the past 2 years. And yeah, but nothing really to add there, just a similar trend. And then finally, third one, gross charge-offs. So charge-offs, every credit quality in general can tend to have a cyclicality to it, as far as when things are reported throughout the year, with peaks at the end of the year and dips in the first quarter of each year. But charge-offs are more so than anything else. So that's why we look at the long-term trend, but we really highlight where you were a year ago. We look at quarterly, discrete quarters of data, not year-to-date. And we look at this most recent quarter versus the same quarter a year ago. And you can see that while at the median level, 1 to 4 family residential still negligible, you've seen you know, a slight bump up at the 75th percentile. C&I has, you know, median gross charge-offs have doubled over the last year, and at the 75th percentile are, you know, approaching 2%, meaning the 90th percentile, meaning 10% of all community banks have over 1.63% charge-offs in their C&I in the fourth quarter. And then consumer loans also have seen an increase year over, it's not huge, but a slight increase year over year. So,
yep.
We've done this a bunch in the past. I just haven't updated the table in the last couple of quarters. So again, this we like to, and this is, I wish that some of the examiners would see this, but when they're picking at specific assumptions on the unfunded commitment. But we're always looking for trends in even unfunded commitments, and we see that while the reserve for the unfunded commitments as a percentage of total unfunded commitments has increased, right? A year ago or a year and a half ago, there was the median reserve for unfunded commitments as a percentage of your total unfunded commitments was 0.00%. That has creeped up till now. In the fourth quarter, it was 14 basis points. But that is an extremely misleading value, because a large percentage of institutions don't report, have 0 reserve for unfunded commitments. So what we did was we also tracked the percent of institutions that have no unfunded commitment reserve despite having unfunded commitments, right? And a year and a half ago, more than half of the community banks in the country were reporting no reserve for unfunded commitments despite having some. And now that's down to 35%, meaning 2/3 of the banks in the country are now reporting are calculating a reserve on their unfunded commitments that they've got. And so if you subtract out all the guys that don't have any unfunded commitments, and you look at, for all of you who are calculating a reserve on unfunded commitments, what are you calculating, right? And that has been completely flat over the last 6 quarters. Has been 0 change. So for all of you, if it was at the 84% of you on this call that are calculating a reserve for your unfunded commitments, of all the 4,300 community banks in the country, you're reporting on average 30 basis points of it, and that's been extremely flat. So while the first line statistics would suggest that people are increasing their reserve, they're not. It's just more people are reporting a reserve.
Right. And then I think that's why we continue to talk about this, because the trend is clearly, if we stretch this back earlier than June 30th of 2023, the percentage reporting 0 would have been even much higher, because when we first
80.
came out of the gates, it was 80%, and now we're down to 35, right? So there's a clear directive on where regulators and auditors are going with the unfunded reserve. And I think almost, maybe a story within the story to Steve's, analysis here, right, is, again, it's not as much about how you're doing it or what you're doing. It's this fact that you have something in there is what they're really after, right? And if you don't have anything, then they're going to kind of come and pick and prod. If you do have something in there, hopefully they're going to pick and prod a little bit less. But it's just, again, it's clear to us that if you have 0, you're going to get questioned. Yeah. Probably going to want you to have something in there.
And as you notice in the comments, during this second exam cycle, we're seeing more picking and prodding. During the first exam cycle, it was really have you made a good faith effort? Have you considered a reserve on your unfunded commitments? And have you thought about putting something there? In the second exam cycle, it's all right, what did you put there? And show me some sort of assumptions for how you got to that number, which is why they're starting to ask questions about probability of funding when a little more than a year ago, they were not.
Yeah. Okay. Again, when you start looking at 4,300 banks across the country, we always just try to identify if there's anything, any stories happening just regionally throughout the country. We certainly are sensitive to that, with particularly with lending portfolios. So Steve, anything you want to, comment here?
No, I mean, no big surprises as we've talked about. Reserves to loans have, kind of been flat to slightly down around the country from 125 to 120 over the last couple of years. But regionally, not surprisingly, the West region has some of the highest reserves, but not that much higher than the Southwest, a little bit higher than the Southeast. But obviously the outlier here is the Northeast. Reserve levels in the Northeast part of the country are significantly lower than any other region of the country, and have been for the long haul.
So we had a question in the chat, Steve. Are banks reserving exactly the amount that is calculated for unfunded commitments? I would say the answer to that is not always. I think, again, there's a materiality threshold that comes into play a lot. But I think they're trying to be close to it, but there's certainly fluctuations potentially in it, depending on how you think about the estimates for probability of funding or utilization throughout the year, Louise. So, again, it varies from bank to bank. I think most try to get close, but for a lot of institutions, the amounts, no matter what happens, just aren't very material. And so, in an attempt to not be constantly going back and forth with entries for that, we see some do it, but not all. Steve, anything? How would you?
Yeah, no, I mean, in the past, like I said, 3 years ago, when 80% of the banks, the idea of having a reserve for unfunded commitments is not new under CECL, right? There already was an existing line item on the other liabilities section of the call report for reserve on unfunded commitments. It was just largely ignored by, like I said, at least 80 or 90% of community banks until CECL put a new emphasis on it. But I think those in the past would have just made the argument, no, I don't have anything in that unfunded reserve. I just have a slightly higher reserve in my actual loan portfolio for those ones that are going to get funded, right? I've padded the loan portfolio reserve a bit because I have a high, unfunded commitment in that particular segment. Now we're seeing the examiners say, well, yeah, you're gonna have to move some of that into the actual unfunded commitment reserve, as opposed to just having a slightly padded reserve on the funded portfolio. That's what we're seeing in this exam cycle, but it's not a huge amount for most institutions. And even if you decide you need to beef that up, it's not a net loss. If you think about it, it's just really front loading your ultimate loan portfolio reserve, right? You'll take a one-time hit, obviously, when you fund the unfunded commitment reserve from your provision expense. But then once those loans get funded, it's just a transfer, and there's no additional loss of the provision. So if those loans are going to get funded anyway, it's a more conservative approach these days. We're like, all right, I'm just going to front load the reserve, put it in the reserve for unfunded commitments to make them happy. And it'll be a little bit, a little expense here, but then when they become funded, it's just a transition, and there's no additional expense. So it's a timing thing. And if it makes them happier, we're seeing more people acquiesce.
Yeah. The only other comment to make about, the regional differences, right? Just going back to, other than the Northeast, we touched on 125 for the reserve, right? It's still kind of, when it's all said and done, the clearest path to peace and harmony with auditors and regulators in the reserve is trying to be somewhere around 120 or 125, right? Or 115, right? I mean, you can kind of see where all the regions, despite the fact that they've been, again, slightly trending down here, that's kind of the magic mark, right? We all want to get away with a little bit less, but that is the quickest way and the easiest way to peace and harmony.
But regionally, you know, if you're
Yeah.
if you're in you know, if you've got a lot of CRE loans and you're on the in Southern California and you're trying to argue for 1%, that may be a tough road to hoe. But if you're in Maine,
Yeah.
it might not be.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Steve, just anything you want to comment here on the interactive industry research?
Yeah, so I showed you all those trends. Those are ones that I created using our Excel add-in, pulling in data from thousands of institutions over time and refreshing those queries using that tool. But if it's something that you'd like to play with or like to change some of the assumptions or look at specific geographies or time periods or anything else, you can certainly use our Excel add-in to do that. But just reminding everyone, we have this industry research tool, a great interactive tool here. We're currently working on a huge enhancement to our industry research. This is sort of the 1.0, I might call it, of what we have. It's focused on credit trends. You can get some other performance metrics as well, but it's mostly focused on credit trends. And we're going to be expanding this to be a much broader industry research tool for analyzing peer trends over time visually for all different types of metrics, not just credit metrics. But looking here, you know, I just pulled this up kind of randomly, but it's a great example of what we've been talking about. Our guinea pig institution that we use a lot is Camden National Bank up in Maine. So you can see the green. I chose Camden as my bank to plot over time. Those are the green bars, and what I'm looking at here is reserved to non-performers, right? So you get an idea of, all right, well, non-performers are going up, but reserves aren't really going up. So what does that mean? Well, your reserves to non-performers you'd expect to be going down. And they peaked in 2022 and they have gone down considerably since then. Still very high, right? 6, 7, 800%, as opposed to back in the early 20 teens where we were averaging, you know, 1 to 100% to 150% coverage. Now we're talking more like 7 to 8 times coverage. But I plotted the institution over a long period, and I threw in, hey, let me see all the let me see UBPR peer group 5 and see that trend over time, and then let me just see all the community banks in the state of Georgia. I just randomly kind of chose Georgia, and that's the blue line. And so you can see those trends over time. You can add multiple banks, multiple peer groups. You can overlay an economic trend like, you know, Fed funds rate or GDP growth or unemployment. And you can just toggle between years and quarters and really change stuff dynamically and see this chart change in real time. And all the data for that chart is visible in a table below, and you can download all the data into Excel or as a PDF as well. So this is a great interactive tool if you're looking for those types of trends, as opposed to just taking my quarterly Excel summary and going with that.
Yeah, and I think you know, part of our reasoning or thought here was, again, you know, we think the add-in tool is great, but you know, it's a little bit more work. So, you know, we were saying, hey, can we even simplify that a little bit further? Because, you know, again, as Steve pointed out, you can look at this over years or quarters. So again, if you're trying to, you know, build a bigger report package of, you know, peer comparisons or just your trends over time, this is a really easy way to do it, right? Because everything's kind of a drop-down menu. You pick your bank, or if you want to pick a few banks or a peer group, but it's really all just kind of drop-downs where you can select what you want and, you know, pick the data range that you want, and it's quarters or years, and it will appear on your screen. But as Steve indicated, you can, you know, print a PDF of that or export it to an Excel file, right? So you can have it if you're trying to bolster any documentation that you might be doing. So I'd encourage you to play around with it. As Steve indicated, we're going to be adding to it, but I find it to be a really great interactive, quick, immediate type of tool and response that's nice.
And everything else, like everything else across QwickAnalytics, not only can you, when you click add research group there, you can add, you know, a national trend, a state trend, a state only community banks trend, any UBPR peer group, or any of your custom peer groups that you've created, you can pull right in there. So the custom peer group, you know, concept is fully integrated throughout the whole platform wherever you're looking at peer data.
So Steve, we had a kind of an accounting question in the chat. If moving some of the unallocated ACL to unfunded commitments, would you suggest moving it on the income statement as well? you know, again, if you're moving just between the two reserves, I don't think you need to run it through the income statement unless you're increasing the overall allocation. But if you're just moving,
Yeah, because the income statement is to fund those things. So you have your provision for ACL is not going, unless you have a net change, the provision for ACL won't be different. It'll just be a transfer, a balance sheet transfer from the contra asset account on the asset side to the liability account on the liability side.
yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead and submit those now. We'll take those. Let's see. Oh, you're very welcome. Just a reminder, all the videos and past webinars are available on our YouTube channel, but also on the website. So I'd certainly encourage you to continue to look at those. For any of you who are want to dig deeper into your portfolio, want more loan level type of analyses. Again, certainly encourage you to take us up on our trial of our IntelliCredit application. I know we've had a few institutions whose their examiners have wanted them to provide more loan level data. This is a way to to easily accomplish that. So again, it's a really easy process. We make the upload and getting started easy. The 3-month trial is really just so you can start to see the reports that might be of, we think huge value to you. We don't want you to have to pay for it till you can see if it's going to help you or not. But I'd certainly encourage you to take us up on our trial. We have some upcoming webinars beyond the coffee talks. Liquidity one coming here in March. A lead generation one in March as well. Next month, Paul Allen, our dear friend from Saltmarsh, is going to join us on the coffee talk.
Yeah,
excuse me, in April. Yes. Whoops. As well, let me just see if there's another question. Is there a way to add custom Fred charts? So Sylvan, yeah, if you let us know which ones you'd like to see, we can get those added to the drop downs. I don't think right now we don't have it as an on-demand capability, but if you send us the ones you'd like to see, we can certainly get those added.
Yeah, well, where we historically we've sort of connected to Fred on an as needed basis for the particular trends that we have there, but we're working on warehousing more of that economic data so we can have a larger data set of Fred charts. And so when we come out, show the 2.0 of industry research, which will be later in the first half of this year, so towards mid-year. You should have significantly more options for some of the economic trends and how we display them and which ones you choose. But if there's one particular one which is sort of esoteric and you don't see that often, but you really like, let us know and I can stick it in there for you.
Yeah, we can get them added. So if there's anything you want to see, again, we're happy to try to get those incorporated as soon as we can. So again, yeah, in April, Paul Allen will be with us for our coffee talk. I don't see any additional questions or chats. Steve, any final words before we let everybody go?
One more question in there. The Federal Reserve's projections, those economic projections, get updated once a year, and it's in February of every year. So they were just updated for 2025 about a week ago, about maybe a week and a half ago, and they are live on our tool. So it'll be this way until next year.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Mustafa. I didn't see that one. Thank you for catching it, Steve. All right. Any other questions or chats? Just go ahead and submit them now. Otherwise, again, thank you very much for joining us today. We're off and running in 2025. We'll see you on the next coffee talk and hope you all have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.